Yeah, take it away.
Great. Thank you so much. It's just such an honor to be here speaking at the Orange County chapter of CNPS because my mother's been a member for over 30 years and it's like part of our family. So it feels like home to me as well. In fact, I have my mother to thank for my love of plants, which has started from when I was just a toddler, really. As a consequence, probably like many of you, I've worked with plants my whole life, and I planted Christmas trees on the Christmas tree farms where I worked, and I planted crops on the farmers market in Northern California. And wherever I lived, I planted what I thought were wildlife oases. But that was until my mother attended a workshop with Doug Tallamy at a CNPS event, and she gave me a copy of Doug Tallamy's first book, Bringing Nature Home. And I learned that most of the plants I grew were introduced plants, and many of them were invasive. So I began spending all my time removing my invasive plants, the ones I had planted, sowing seed, planting native plants, and chasing off the deer, which is a really big problem here. And this is so lucky that you don't have deer in Orange County. At any rate, one Saturday afternoon, I was outside and it was just the neighbors were mowing with their huge lawnmowers and it was super noisy and it just felt hopeless. And suddenly I had this really great idea. I thought, why don't we move near the Tallamys? I knew that they lived in southeastern Pennsylvania, which is where we live. And a week later, I was out weeding Creeping Charlie, which is this obnoxious weed that we have in the Northeast. And I was weeding it out and I came across this scrap of paper. And as I picked it up to throw it away, I noticed that it was a corner of an envelope with a return address label on it. And I looked again and did a double take. The address label read the Tallamy family. It turned out that the Tallamys live just 2 properties over from my house. And as I'll explain later, it was several years passed by before I dared to introduce myself. This evening, we're going to be looking at how we can answer Doug's call to action to restore biodiversity by building resilient wildlife habitats filled with native plants that also fit into modern day neighborhoods. We'll start with a brief overview of specialization in nature and why it matters when it comes to optimizing our wildlife habitats. And then we'll look at tools for choosing the most ecologically beneficial plants to welcome caterpillars, pollinators, birds, and other creatures. Next, we're going to look at strategies that revolve around protecting the populations that our native plants attract. And then we'll consider some aspects of design that can make it easier for gardeners with different skill levels and resources to make their ecological plantings appealing. Finally, we'll briefly look at ways we can care for our wildlife landscape so that it's accepted by our neighbors. So there's a lot to talk about, so let's dig in. Historically, habitat loss caused by human activity has been the greatest cause of plant and animal population decline and extinction for most species. But recently, entomologist David L. Wagner suggests that we're at a new point in human history where climate change is surpassing habitat loss as the cause of biodiversity loss. In the CNPS Summer 2025 issue of Flora, Wade Crowfoot described the nature crisis and the climate crisis as 2 sides of the same coin. Addressing both biodiversity loss and climate change is our only chance of passing on a livable planet for future generations. I too like to think of climate change and the biodiversity movement as 2 sides of the same coin, but coins actually have 3 sides. And this is where we come in. The third side of the coin is all of us. And to quote a person we all treasure, we are nature's best hope. This evening, I'm using the word we very specifically to mean all of us here tonight and everyone across the globe who has an understanding of the urgency to take action before it's too late for our actions to matter. I think that with this understanding comes this great opportunity to share this awareness with others in a welcoming way, free of judgment, so that together we can take joyful action. And this brings me back to the Tallamy tale. For several years, I gardened knowing that the Tallamys lived just 2 properties away. Now, there was no way I could just hop over and introduce myself. I come from a fruit growing background, and a list of fruit species I used to grow reads like a list of perpetrators in an invasive plant crime novel. Clearly, I could not introduce myself to the Tallamys until I'd removed all these invasive plants. Plus, like any self-respecting gardener, I had to get my gardens looking perfect. So several years passed by. One summer day, I was once again feeling overwhelmed and defeated, and I mailed a letter to Dr. Tallamy introducing myself and saying, I love your books, but this stuff you're recommending that we do is hard to do. You need a step-by-step guide to go along with your books. And in so many words, he replied, great idea, write it. And that's how I came to spend 4 years of my life neglecting my gardens and writing Nature's Action Guide. The guide takes an environmentally friendly, cost-conscious, and toward zero waste approach. The goal is to help people from all demographics, regardless of their skills or interest in gardening, to take the actions needed to support biodiversity. It features the 15 urgently needed actions shown here. The actions are listed in the handout, which you can find on naturesactionguide.org/OCCNPS. And all the references that I'll mention, the links, etc., they're listed in the handout. And I'll post this again at the end of the talk. Well, it's not often that good news and climate change appear in the same sentence, but I think it's really good news that it turns out that our efforts to support biodiversity, in which planting native plants is central, also help with mitigation and adaptation to climate change. You can probably guess the answer to this question. How can we restore biodiversity, increase local abundance, and address climate change? By building wildlife habitat. Building wildlife habitat not only increases biodiversity, it also increases the local abundance of wildlife, and it helps to address climate change. And a really positive thing about this is that building wildlife habitat is something that you and I can do in whatever spaces we have. Let's explore some strategies for doing exactly this. An ecological landscape is different from traditional U.S. landscapes by its focus on providing wildlife habitat. And a resilient wildlife habitat must offer food, water, cover, and nesting. We're going to look at some resources to help us maximize the wildlife habitat around us. Animals and plants evolve over time to find their ecological niche. Some species can survive using a variety of resources, while others require specific resources or specific environmental conditions. Plants adapted to a wide range of growing conditions are considered generalist plants, and in contrast to specialists that require precise growing conditions. For example, the generalist black cherry is a fast-growing tree with a wide distribution from the East Coast to Arizona, in contrast to the pitcher plant that requires boggy, acidic soil, full sun, and high humidity, significantly limiting its distribution. When it comes to insects, generalists are those with a wide variety of food options or other adaptations, while specialists are uniquely adapted to one or just a few options. Insect specialization is why the vast majority of introduced plants, although really beautiful in our landscapes, fail to support the full range of local diversity of wildlife. If it weren't for specialization, we wouldn't have to spend all this time removing invasive plants, and we could continue planting the thousands of stunningly gorgeous introduced plants. But specialization does occur in nature. For example, although some caterpillars are generalists because they can feed on many different plant species, the majority are specialists. If their host plants aren't present, these caterpillars won't be present either. With all of this in mind, let's look at how to choose plants for our wildlife habitat. As California gardeners, you have Cowscape, which I have to confess I'm quite envious of. We're going to look at a few resources for choosing plants for specific wildlife populations that can then be revisited in CalScape to learn about each plant in depth. As you no doubt know from Doug Tallamy's work, there's a large group of plants that make planting for specialist caterpillars a lot easier. Keystone plants. In Orange County, willow's the top keystone genus, hosting over 328 moth and butterfly species. Some caterpillars specialize on plants that are not keystone species. The monarch caterpillar, with its dependence on milkweed, makes milkweed a perfect example of a host plant that isn't a keystone plant, but that critically needs to be planted if we're to prevent the monarch species from going extinct. Pollinator Partnership offers a handy guide to caterpillar host plants specific to Southern California. This free guide features 5 caterpillar host plant relationships with a photo of the host plant at the top of each column, the caterpillar in the middle, and the adult Lepidoptera at the bottom. To dig in deeper, the National Wildlife Federation has a native plant finder. It's a resource that Doug helped to create, and it's a very helpful tool for identifying more host plants for caterpillars. You can click Find Native Plants to view the top keystone plants for your region, or if you're an experienced gardener, you might consider working in reverse to choose plants for specific species of caterpillars by clicking Find Butterflies, or by typing a butterfly's name in the search bar. The profiles are arranged by the specialists, the pickiest eaters, first. These 4 Lepidoptera use only one genus as a host plant. You can also identify the specific species of a keystone genera found in your area for many of the plants by clicking on the plant profiles. It's a really useful resource. Native pollen specialist bees are another large group of specialists. Obviously, native bees play a key role in a resilient wildlife habitat. Here are the top 4 genera for native pollen specialist bees in the western US. For example, plants in the Helianthus genus support 101 native bee species. It's worth noting that Helianthus also supports 71 caterpillar species, making it a keystone plant. Jared Fowler has provided this super helpful resource for the western US. It lists the genus of native bees along with their nectar and pollen gathering time and their host plant families. If you're an experienced gardener, you may want to seek out and plant the less common host plants that vulnerable populations of rare native pollen specialist bees need, which in some cases are also rare plants that need propagating. Pollinator Partnership also offers some handy planting guides for selecting plants for pollinators. Definitely check out this eco-regional planting guide for this region. It describes this region's different pollinators, and then it also lists the native plants that attract pollinators in this region, along with lots of helpful information. Different species of native bees and other insects emerge from their nests at all different times during the growing season. And for some, their active nectar and pollen gathering stage lasts just a couple of weeks. If we plant for a sequence of blooms, the flowers these specialists need for survival are more likely to be in bloom. For help choosing a sequence of blooms, the Pollinator Partnership provides helpful native pollinator garden recipe cards. These plants are a good starting point. We can further optimize our planting for insects by planting a variety of different color flowers. For example, native bees are especially attracted to yellow, and beetles are attracted to white and green flowers. Bees need nesting places. Planting pithy and hollow stem plants provides nesting sites for cavity nesting insects such as bees, beetles, and wasps. Leave some spots of bare ground in your garden's area for ground nesting bees. When tidying up, it's really important to resist cutting everything to the ground. Instead, cut stems to varying heights between 8 to 24 inches. If you live in a formal neighborhood, you can cut stems to 8 inches or 12 inches, and it tends to look tidy enough for any kind of neighborhood. Whatever else you do, Wildlife biologist and entomologist and native bee expert Sam Droege urges us to plant flowers in whatever spaces we have. He explains that it takes just 5 flowers to raise one baby bee. A large flower like a sunflower supplies enough pollen and nectar to feed 100 bee cells. Even just a container on a balcony filled with flowers could mean a native bee survives. Flies and beetles are also important pollinators. Flies prefer flat-top flowers like yarrow and aster because they're easy to land on and the flower's open structure gives ready access to nectar and pollen. We can attract beetles by providing moist leaf litter, putting logs and rocks in our garden beds, and researching and planting the host plants for different beetle species. Horned lizards, which were so much more abundant when we were kids, need places to bask. They also need loose, gravelly soil for burrowing, vegetation for cover, and above all, a steady supply of insects, especially native harvester ants. Encourage these ants by identifying and getting rid of the invasive Argentine ant. Although spiders aren't pollinators, they're essential predators and prey in the food web. Spiders benefit from all the actions that we take to protect insects. In addition, planting densely in layers provides structural diversity for hiding spots, hunting perches, and anchor points for web building. When choosing plants, try to find local ecotypes. As you likely know, ecotypes of a plant or animal species are subpopulations within a species that have adapted to local environmental conditions. Although they're the same species, ecotypes are genetically distinct. For example, northern ecotypes of side oats grama are shorter and flower earlier than southern ecotypes. Some ecotypes of little blue stem are better adapted to sandy soils, while others are adapted to clay soil. These local adaptations provide resilience, so whenever possible, try to grow local ecotypes, but they can be hard to source. So if you can't find local ecotypes, definitely don't let this become an obstacle to planting lots of native plants. Another concern when choosing plants is, are nativars okay to use in a wildlife landscape? The answer depends in part on the specific nativar. Some have good features, such as Phlox paniculata gina, a selection from the wild that attracts more pollinators than the straight species. But, and it's a pretty big but, most nativars must be propagated asexually, for example, by cuttings or tissue culture. If you plant 15 asexually propagated plugs of a species, you get 15 genetically identical clones. If you plant 15 seeds of a species, assuming they all come up, you get 15 genetically unique plants. The lack of genetic diversity in a clonal population of plants fails to provide resilience. In contrast, the genetic diversity of straight species offers the possibility of genetic variations that might be better suited to a changing environment, potentially ensuring a species' survival. Changes in flower anatomy in nativars may make nectar and pollen inaccessible to insects, as is the case in these poofy-headed coneflowers. Some flowers have ultraviolet nectar guides. We can't see them, but insects can. These patterns act like a map, guiding insects to the nectar and pollen. These maps may be scrambled or absent in nativars. Another problem is that nativars may cross-pollinate with wild populations of the straight species and contaminate the genetic pool of the wild population, and this happens with rose mallow. The red foliage bred into nativars is now showing up in rose mallow populations in the wild. Studies show that the red foliage is significantly inferior as a caterpillar host plant, not only in rose mallow, but generally. Sometimes such crossbreeding can even lead to the disappearance of the native species. Please don't poke pins in my effigy. I'm not suggesting that nativars and cultivars have no place in our landscape. Sometimes it's hard to source straight species, and cultivars are your only choice. Some cultivars, such as those of the American chestnut, offer resistance to diseases that threaten straight species populations. And cultivars with their compact growth, for example, can play a really important role in building acceptance for a more natural look in formal HOA-ruled neighborhoods. It's just that when it comes to supporting genetic diversity for a resilient landscape filled with wildlife, it's best to stick with straight species grown from seed whenever possible. Speaking of which, to make transitioning to wildlife landscapes affordable for everyone, growing plants from seed must become common knowledge. For many native species, sowing seed is as easy as baking brownies. We simply haven't been shown how to do this. In the handout, I've included these 3 pages with tips for procuring plants on a tight budget, making it easier to plant generously. There's truth to the maxim, plant it and they will come. In the same way that we put the knives out of reach before allowing a toddler in the kitchen, we'll look at ways to proactively protect the wildlife our native plants will attract. Small populations lack the resilience that large populations have when drought, extreme temperatures, or something else takes a heavy toll on a population. We need to build up and protect local abundance now to give populations as much time as possible to get established in our landscapes and strengthened so that they can withstand the challenges the future holds. In the face of biodiversity loss and climate change, perhaps the most important animal populations that need our protection are insects and other invertebrates. If you ever doubt that your efforts to build wildlife habitat are important and urgently needed, read this article. It describes the experience of ecologist Daniel Jensen. One night in 1978, in the middle of a dense Costa Rican forest, he took a photograph of moths in which approximately 3,000 species of moths were identified, all different sizes, shapes, and colors. Not 3,000 individual moths, but 3,000 species of moths. In the article, he described that back then, with a 25-watt bulb on the porch, the outside walls of his house would be plastered with tens of thousands of moths. Now, he hangs a sheet in the same setting, but just a few moths flutter to the light. And when he works outside at night, a single moth landing on his computer screen is a welcome sight. Most sobering of all, this observation took place in a pristine landscape, largely uninhabited by humans. Despite the shocking population declines worldwide, we live in a twisted reality in which most of our society is engaged in a war on insects. Yet, without healthy, predominantly native plants and supportive habitat, we lose our insects and other invertebrates. We lose our caterpillars, the foundation of the terrestrial food web. We lose our pollinators that ensure the reproduction of over 90% of flowering plants, our beneficial predators that control insect pests, and our decomposers that help process our waste. Insects can survive without us, but we cannot survive without insects. What can each of us do to increase insect populations? Our plant choices offer a first line of defense for insects by providing nourishment, cover from predators, and safe places to reproduce. There are other obvious things we need to do, like using non-toxic pest control methods. We can protect insects with our shopping dollars, for example, by buying plants only from nurseries that refuse to use neonicotinoids. At the residential scale, we can control almost all the pests we encounter in our homes and yards using non-toxic control methods. Pesticides really aren't needed in a residential DIY wildlife habitat. For alternative pest management methods, visit beyondpesticides.org. At home and in our communities, we have ample opportunity to encourage and protect insects and other nocturnal wildlife. Some of the easiest but most powerful actions to support insects and biodiversity in general and climate change relate to how we light our spaces. The rich ecology of nocturnal wildlife depends on darkness. Artificial light at night affects the physiological and ecological processes of plants, including their growth, flowering, and dormancy. Emerging research is showing that light pollution affects nocturnal insect activity, which then affects daytime plant-insect interactions, such as pollination. Moths are fatally attracted to artificial light at night. Given the importance of caterpillars in the food web, this is particularly concerning. Fortunately, this is a problem we all can help to solve by changing our essential outdoor lighting to amber or yellow LED bulbs. Turning off the lights or switching to red lights protects bats, since artificial light at night interferes with their roosting, foraging, and flight patterns. Although it might seem that bats could forage more easily around lights, instead, bats may starve to death before leaving their roosts as they wait for the darkness of night that never comes. This town in the Netherlands adopted red lighting throughout its township to protect local breeding sites of rare bat populations. Like with bats, switching to yellow and amber LED bulbs is unfortunately not enough to protect birds either. Migratory bird populations are especially vulnerable, like the white-throated sparrow shown here. Birds become disoriented and strike glass, or they fly around all night until they finally land exhausted. At this point, they're vulnerable to other hazards. Lights off is best for our birds. Turning out the lights includes pulling your blinds or curtains. And where outdoor light is absolutely necessary, light fixtures should include dusk to dawn motion sensors and timers. Shield your fixtures to direct light downward where it's needed and nowhere else. If resources permit, consider replacing your light fixtures with dark sky friendly fixtures. For ideas, search online for dark sky lighting. Visit darksky.org to learn how to protect the night skies where you live. With a few changes in our habits and minimal expense, we can create unofficial dark sky parks of our own. One of the most deadly ecological traps are the glass windows in our homes and throughout our communities. Early in the morning, before street cleaners make their morning pass, lights out volunteers walk downtown city streets to pick up and record glass strike victims, like this tragic collection. In the United States alone, over 1 billion birds die per year when they fly into glass windows. This equates to an average of 2.7 million birds killed every day. You've likely heard that sickening thump on a window at your house. In the US alone, an average of 1 million birds strike glass per day at our home windows. After striking glass, birds may fly off. The majority die later from internal injuries, broken bones, predation, and other dangers. We can help to prevent this tragedy by applying stickers or painting designs on the outside of our windows. I've included the stencil for making these leaf stickers and a grid for painting dots in the handout. Remember the 2x2 rule. Gaps larger than 2 inches and single stickers simply don't offer protection. Right now, you're probably thinking that this makes it really horrible to look out the windows, but it doesn't at all. If you live in a fancy neighborhood, consider purchasing products such as evenly spaced dots applied from a roll of tape or film. Visit the American Bird Conservancy website for a database of glass strike prevention products and solutions. We must protect our wildlife habitat from our beloved cats. It's hard to get one's head around the fact that our pet cats kill between 1 to 2.7 million birds per day. Stray cats such as barn cats kill 3 times that many. We can still have cats. We just need to create interesting indoor worlds for them and care for them in a wildlife-friendly way. With a little time and patience, most cats can be leash trained. It's a safety win for both wildlife and cats. If you have the unhappy experience of finding a dead or injured bird, report it to dbird.org. Their mission is to guide conservation and advocacy efforts to reduce human-caused hazards to birds. On a more hopeful note, if you come across an injured, orphaned, or distressed animal, visit the Animal Help Now website for a list of local wildlife emergency organizations. Orange County offers a strong network of support for small mammals, injured birds, oiled water birds, and more. Circling back to plants, in this case, the pests, we need to protect our native plants and animals from aggressive non-native species. With the changing climate, conditions are becoming more favorable for diseases and pests from both the plant and animal kingdoms due to the milder winters, ecosystem disturbance from weather events, and other factors. You're so fortunate to have all the resources of the California Invasive Plant Council at your fingertips. And something else to feel really fortunate about is that you don't have stiltgrass. It was used as packing material to ship porcelain from Asia in the early 1900s. It now blankets much of the eastern US. It grows 3 inches tall in lawns to over 4 feet tall in the woods, smothering native vegetation as it spreads. On the left is my front garden in the summer of 2023. There were a couple of stiltgrass plants, which I removed. Otherwise, the bed was pretty clean, except for the pre-existing seed bank. In the summer of 2024, due to a serious injury, I couldn't get out in the garden. And here, run over with stiltgrass is the same space. I recently spent 20 mornings removing stiltgrass. Here's one morning's efforts. Planning ahead can prevent invasive species from getting a foothold in the first place. Considering strategies such as these segues nicely into our next topic, designing for ecology and beauty. Once we've chosen the plants wildlife needs and put protections in place, we need to design our space to maximize its ecological benefits and its beauty. If we come from an ecological perspective, transitioning our landscape to wildlife habitat may be an easier adjustment plant-wise, but it can be more challenging to fit into the neighborhood. On the other hand, if we come from a horticultural background, our gardens might be more likely to fit in with the neighborhood, but adjusting to a new plant palette and a more natural look can be challenging to embrace. How can we design our home landscape for ecology and beauty? Fortunately, except for those who are professional landscape designers, we only need to be the expert landscape designer for our own property. We don't need to know everything. Design is central to maximizing the ecological functions a landscape performs. We need to support our landscape in providing these 4 essential ecological functions. We've covered some of the ways to meet these goals, and in the handout is a list of specific actions within each of these 4 ecological functions. In addition to designing the spacing of plants across the landscape, design for the dimension of time. Space the timing of blooms or other displays across the growing season. As we saw earlier, this temporal spacing of blooms helps pollinators. With the threat of weather events and a changing climate, we need to plant a sequence of blooms, and we need to take it one step further and build in functional redundancy. This is just a fancy way of saying we need to plant multiple species that bloom at the same time, ideally aiming for 3 blooming plants at any given time, such as these 3 bloomers time for spring. This way, even if some plants bloom earlier than they used to, or they fail to bloom, a sequence of blooms still happens. Here's another design strategy for pollinators. Pollinators are more likely to visit flowers when there's at least a 3-foot by 3-foot mass of their preferred species. Once you've identified a butterfly's preferred nectar plants and its caterpillar host plant, you can plant them nearby one another. Here, the skipper's nectar and host plants are side by side, shortening their commute for groceries. Get to know the foraging distances of your local pollinators as well so that you can strategically place plants to help optimize their foraging efficiency. For example, although bumblebees may travel up to 4.6 miles to forage, the small carpenter bee travels a mere 22 to 78 yards in search of nectar and pollen. Optimizing foraging distances is one of the goals of the Pollinator Pathway Program, which strives to connect properties into a continuous pathway for pollinators, richly planted with the nectar and pollen that the pollinators need. Using an average foraging distance of 820 yards, Pollinator Pathway aims to connect properties no farther apart than this. Consider becoming a part of the Pollinator Pathway. Where possible, connect the plantings on your own property. For example, outside of high fire risk zones, if you already have several trees, plant another tree nearby them, rather than planting an isolated tree on the other side of your property. Underneath the trees, encourage dense growth that includes shrubs and forbs. These 3 oaks in my front yard and additional planned understory plants will eventually fill in. Optimize your neighbors' plantings by situating your ecological plantings near theirs. This begins to create habitat corridors, allowing animals to freely roam and reproduce with the other subpopulations, and it begins to create the interior habitat needed by deep woods dwellers. Whenever possible, include water for wildlife in your design. Add as many water features for wildlife as you can reasonably take care of. And when possible, add larger water features. They do take more work to install, but they're well worth the effort because you can see some of the most exciting wildlife visitors when they're attracted to water. When envisioning an ecological planning, it's super helpful to observe many landscapes so that you can start to get a feel for what style of design appeals to you. The more rigid an HOA, the more formal the design requirements are likely to be. Different areas of your property may call for different approaches. Make a mental note where your aesthetics fall along this continuum. Native plants can fit into whichever aesthetic you prefer. One simple concept of design stems from the savanna hypothesis, which suggests that our perception of beauty in the landscape is shaped by our human evolution. Dense forests limited our ancestors' ability to scan for dangers and flee, and wide open spaces lacked cover. Instead, there was safety in open, vegetated spaces with trees, like this meadow at Lady Bird Johnson Wildflower Center in Austin, Texas. So we're instinctually attracted to a spacious landscape of small understory trees with an open canopy of see-through lower branches that separate near the ground into 2 or more trunks, underplanted with low-growing plants. By choosing keystone species for these understory trees, employing the savanna approach adds both appeal and ecological function, resulting in a design landscape that fits into any neighborhood. Meanwhile, the keystone trees will attract caterpillars, so mowed lawn beneath them becomes an ecological trap. When caterpillars drop from the tree to pupate, but either can't burrow into the soil, it's compacted from mowing, or they get mowed over. By leaving the leaves and filling the spaces beneath native shrubs and trees with plants, we support moths and butterflies by creating caterpillar pupation sites, or soft landings. For more about soft landings, visit pollinator expert Heather Holmes' website. While the savanna approach works well when it comes to making our wildlife habitats appealing to people, if you have the space, wildlife needs all layers of the landscape, keeping in mind that not all plant communities contain all 5 vertical layers. Next time you're out in your landscape, walk around and note where you might be able to add plants to one or more of these vertical layers. Through decades of studying how people interact with nature, researchers Kaplan, and Ryan identified 4 factors that we can apply to make our landscapes welcoming and appealing. Coherence gives a sense of order to a landscape. Complexity provides visual richness. Legibility shows people how to navigate around the landscape, and a sense of mystery lures people in. A unifying ground layer is one way to give coherence to a landscape. This might be a matrix of native sedge or a creeping plant like the native strawberry shown here. Ecologically, this layer helps to serve as a green mulch that protects the soil while providing habitat and food resources to wildlife. In addition to attracting pollinators, massing an odd number of plants of the same species gives a plant species a stronger visual presence for people as well. Repeated random masses of plants adds to the coherence of a planting by providing organization and rhythm, much like a musical score. Incorporating interesting features into your landscape design helps to add visual complexity. Here, a false door, designed and built by my mother, gives intrigue to an otherwise imposing wall. Winter stems add interest, and a water feature provides visual appeal, and pretty flowers speak for themselves. In Kaplan, and Ryan's work, legibility refers to how one should navigate around the landscape, but in landscape design, legibility is often used more generally to describe an understandable and pleasing design that viewers can easily comprehend. As Joan Nassauer explained in a 1995 article, surrounding plantings with crisp, clean edges is a fast way to create an orderly frame that tidies up a natural planting. Edges can be intentional, such as the edge around this garden bed, or they may occur incidentally where a structural element, such as this repurposed concrete slab bench, defines the edge of a native planting. Pathways and opening add mystery, guiding visitors through the landscape with the promise that there's more to discover. Replacing lawn with natural plantings may upset our less receptive neighbors. We can make our landscape feel familiar and welcoming by adding signage, leaving a patch of grass, providing seating, or planting familiar flowers. These elements can go a long way toward fostering neighborhood acceptance. A handy recipe for designing attractive beds is to use the thriller, filler, spiller method popularized for container planting. Plan where a few taller accent plants can go. These are your thrillers. These might be a tall perennial or clumping grass, a shrub, or an understory tree. Then place your fillers, which can be several masses of 3 to 5 medium height flowering plants or grasses. Finish off by planting all the gaps with your spillers, such as native sedges or creeping plants like native strawberry. Finally, with our landscape designed to please and our plants in place, all that's left now is to care for our property in a way that adds to its appeal. Cues to care, another concept introduced by Joan Nassauer, are visible actions that can help our landscapes gain acceptance wherever you live. A tidy mailbox area and a welcoming entrance can help build acceptance. Reducing lawn, if you have any lawn, is an important action to support biodiversity. But keeping a small patch of mowed lawn can signal to your neighbors that you're actively maintaining your landscape, even if the surrounding landscape is more natural. Along with the other cues to care, keeping sidewalks and pathways clear and staking flopping plants or planting them in the back of the bed go a long way toward making a natural landscape visually appealing and culturally acceptable. Believe it or not, there's supposed to be a pathway in the photo on the left. This is an extreme example of an unacceptable pathway to the front door. My front door, in fact. There's a yellow jacket nest right in the middle there, and having already been stung twice, I'm not even going near there. Finally, take the time to enjoy your wildlife landscape. Your presence in the garden is one of the best ways to encourage neighborhood acceptance, and your shadow is the best guarantee that your wildlife habitat will both thrive and be beautiful. Together, we can create wildlife habitat wherever we live. In spaces large and small, your wildlife habitat will make a difference. Whether you're just starting out or leagues beyond, as we work together to create resilient wildlife habitats that help to address both biodiversity and climate warming, I'm so glad to be on this journey with you. Thank you for all you do. I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Yay, that was awesome. Thank you so much, Sarah.
Ah, you're welcome. Very welcome.
I saw that a few came up in the chat, so I can read those out loud. Let's see. From John, many people around here who decide that they want to have quote native plants use plants that are native to California but not locally native. For example, in Orange County, they'll use Ceanothus grisis variation horizontiensis instead of local Ceanothus like Ceanothus spinosus. I believe that this is a problematic and ecologically destructive. What do you think?
I think that really sort of swings back to the local ecotypes and the local plants. Yes, plants, a lot of times we are planting plants that are native in a region that neighbors us. These are called adventive plants, and they aren't native, so that the relationships with the insects and other creatures haven't co-evolved with them as closely. In some cases, the species is like where there might be a Ceanothus, the research, one would have to do the research to see if this, for example, the Ceanothus would still support the insects. For instance, it's very interesting that the prunus trees, so some of the decorative cherry trees that we see, for example, they actually do support, even though they're not native, they do support some caterpillars. So perhaps not to the extent that the native prunus species would, but there is some overlap when the genus is the same, or so. But John is absolutely right that in an ideal world we wouldn't do that, but it's really actually kind of tricky for people because what's available is limited, and also it's extremely something that one has to study. So if you're truly committed to supporting the local insects, then yes, you definitely want to do that research. And the BONAP maps, those are the maps I showed earlier that you probably are aware of, the Biota of North America maps. They're really, really helpful for identifying the specific species that are native to a county. That's BONAP. And all you need to do is to verify that a plant specific species is just Google or use whatever search engine you prefer, and just type BONAP county and then the genus. And that will list all the different species within that genus, and you can tell which ones are local to your county. So yes, definitely strive for that. But the cautionary other side of that is uh, we don't want people not planting native plants because they're too worried about that. So start where you are and plant what you can, and then you can refine your plantings as you become knowledgeable about which plants are specifically native to exactly where you live. Yeah.
Okay. See, I think there was a few more. As somebody said, how do I get access to the handout reference multiple times during the presentation? I think I linked that in the chat, but I'll do that one more time.
There, can you see that on the screen now?
Yes.
Yeah, that's the address. It's just the title of book.org, and it's OCCNPS /. Don't forget, I think you probably need the slash. But and if you have any questions or you can't access the handout or anything, my email is the same, Sarah, Sarah, at naturesactionguide.org. Feel free to email me with any questions as well. So that shouldn't, if you have any troubles accessing that, just let me know.
Cool. And then I see that Chuck asked, in your neighborhood, have many adopted your example?
Isn't that interesting? Doug's property is, as I said, just 2 doors over. That picture I showed you of the driveway, that's their driveway into their property. And the beautiful thing is that he's on 10 acres and the property, like right kind of like catty corner to us, is 10 acres as well. When they first moved in, they asked Doug for a recommendation for a landscape designer. And they're well heeled, so they could afford this. And they hired Larry Weiner, which in the East Coast is well known, and perhaps in California too. He's well known for his meadows. So and they were able to bring in him and have them do their 10 acres with Larry Weiner, who does sustainable ecological designs, specifically meadows. So, but uh, my neighbors, I'm 1 acre and more in a where there's 1 acre properties. And no, all the pictures I showed that were East Coast pictures were from my house or my neighbors. So this big expanses of lawn, that's my neighbor. The rock mulch, that's my neighbor across the street. And that inspired my neighbor next door to put rock mulch down. So I'm afraid that around here, you measure your worth by your height of your grass. You know, it's bad. We got a long way to go. Yeah.
That's so
Thank
cool
you.
though that your like little strip is like able to have like the community of doing that together.
Yeah. Yeah. We're a corridor. Yeah.
Sorry, I think I may have cut somebody off. I don't know if somebody had a question. Okay. Um, let's see. I think there was another question from John in the chat. Have you ever had any success in getting HOAs to accept the idea of native vegetation?
I personally, we personally do not live in an HOA controlled neighborhood. We made sure of that before we moved in. But there are a lot of there are successful HOA challenges in Maryland, and the Homegrown National Park has an excellent guide. I'm not saying that they have a guide, but they have excellent resources as far as dealing with HOAs, as does Wild Ones. And in Nature's Action Guide, and I'm happy to email if you don't have a copy, just shoot me an email with that question. But in Nature's Action Guide, I do list some resources for HOAs. There's, for instance, the Wild Ones has a weed police video and talks about strategies for dealing with that. It's very helpful. And Homegrown National Park, with Doug Tallamy's input, has responses of what to say to HOAs. And there's also been some really successful rulings by HOA or by neighborhoods or municipalities that have won for the wildlife gardener and not for the HOA. So go wildlife gardeners.
Yeah, and Mary in the chat also said we recently OCCMPS did a talk with some local people working with their HOAs. So I think that's on our YouTube channel. It was an in-person presentation, but there were like 3 different gardens throughout Orange County that work with HOAs. So
Oh, that's so great to hear. Yeah.
I have one more question.
yeah, go ahead.
Sarah, this presentation was absolutely delightful, stellar, informative. I mean, I can't say enough good things about it. And your book, I've leafed through it. I'm going to read it more carefully. But I'm wondering, do you have this presentation that you did tonight anywhere that we could forward to our friends, like a YouTube of this presentation?
Oh, I'd be happy to make that possible. Uh, I don't know if it will be posted on the Orange County chapter's site, but if you'd like to post it there, you may do that as well. And that might be a way then to share it, Chuck. If but if not, I'd be happy to share the link. I
Okay.
but I obviously I didn't record this, but I did record it just while I was practicing in case we had a technical malfunction. I had it ready to send, all recorded. So if you feel free to email me if you have any trouble getting access to a recording, and I'd be happy to share that with you, and then you could share it out. That'd be great because we really do want to get the message out. And thank you for your kind words. That makes it all worth it. I really appreciate
Oh my gosh. So do you get to interact quite a bit with Doug? Are you?
Um, oh my goodness. He travels, he travels all the time. He's out of town most of the time. He does about 3 or 4 talks every week.
Oh,
Or some of them are on Zoom, but it's his wife Cindy, and she and I get together much more often regularly because she's home. She's more of a homebody. Yeah. But yeah, so
do you get to
about that.
spend time with Robin Wall Kimmerer?
Oh, I never have met her. No,
Yeah, I
no.
can imagine you guys would be
Oh,
best buds.
yeah, she's amazing. Yeah,
Yeah. Well, so
yeah.
are you. This again, bringing together the various aspects. I love the landscape with the 7 or 9 things that you're going to cover tonight. Those were beautiful, but I've never had such a profound connection between wildlife and native plants. Of course, I know it, but the way that you pointed it out, gosh, I think, didn't Doug say that if all the plants from California to New York were natives, it would do as much for the environment as if we stopped driving cars?
Wow, I haven't heard that quote, but if you've heard it, I believe he probably said that.
And
Yeah,
with everything that you've described, imagine if everyone had this,
yeah,
even in spite of all the land usage and climate change, this would
yeah.
be just drive through the Central Valley, you know,
Oh,
200 miles in California where there's no weeds, no birds, no insects.
no insects on our windshields like there were 30 years ago when you
Oh,
drove up the 5.
yeah,
Remember driving up the 5 and you couldn't even see out the window
yeah.
when you were done. And now you're lucky to have, I don't know, but here in Pennsylvania, if you get one insect on your windshield, it's like, oh, it's not something to celebrate because that poor insect lost its life, but it is indicative of uh, wow. Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. It's so urgent. And however
Yes.
we can help people to make it easy for people, it's what we
Well,
need to do.
you've done
Yeah.
it. I mean, your book and this guide, I mean, hats off. Just
Oh, thank you. Thank you so
I
much.
will email you and
Please do.
about the YouTube idea.
Please do. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
You're very welcome.
Cool. And then I think there was, if anyone has any more questions, before to ask them, I think I have one more question from John in the chat. Or sorry, let me address the YouTube though too.
Ah,
We
yes.
record this, so we recorded it. It will go on our YouTube, the Orange County CNPS. It may take like a little bit just because we have volunteers and we're all on our own time schedule. So we'll hopefully get that in the next like few weeks or so. But
Oh, great news.
yeah,
That
Fantastic.
is great.
cool. And
Yeah.
then, so John's question, you're the first person to give a talk to our chapter that I can remember to mention the reasons why we should avoid using cultivars. Do you have any resources or authorities I could use to help make the case for just using straight species?
Oh, that's a good question that I do. I would have to type it out and provide that. So, uh, John, if you were to email me, I would be happy to make a listing of those resources, or at least whatever I have, I would be happy to share with you. Yeah, definitely.
Cool. John gave a thumbs up. So
Oh,
yeah,
okay.
so I
I
think
saw
he's
that.
gonna message you.
Okay, perfect. I look forward to it.
Cool. And does anyone else have any more questions? Cool. Well, with that, oh wait, let's see, one more person. Should weed fabric be avoided for long-term gardens?
Yeah, weed fabric is problematic. Not only does it release PFAs and other kind of materials into the environment, but when it's laid down, then it blocks the connection, the interaction of the soil microlife and the surface. So there's a rich soil life, at least you want there to be a rich soil life. And when there's that layer, then those animals beneath it, those microorganisms and small burrowing creatures can't come through. So it really is a problem. And it isn't the other thing about it is if sometimes I've seen, for instance, in Texas, a lot of the landscape designers put the weed barrier down and then they put rocks under an oak tree, which it looks very neat and tidy. It actually looks really nice. But can you imagine? Here we have this oak tree that's attracting caterpillars, and they're dropping down into a rock and mulch base. That's the end of their life. So it's an ecological trap. So that's yeah, unfortunately, the lawn fabric, the weed fabric, it's useful for one thing. When you're cutting a tree and you don't want to apply herbicides, you just can wrap the tree and tie it at the base, and that will do in a tree without having to use any herbicide. So that works on the scale of a residential scale. But yeah, I wish I could say it was a good thing to use because it's very convenient. But it actually often doesn't even work because the weeds seeds land on top of it, and then you have a weeding nightmare. That's what I have on this property is all of that. And I'm still fighting that horrible landscape fabric that's all tied in with the roots of the shrubs. So yeah, sadly, a lot of the really convenient things are ultimately more work, but also toxic for the environment. So yeah, we have our work cut out for us. I'm afraid to say, but it's worth it.
You're a great cheerleader. Thank you.
There's a
You're well.
follow-up question about that.
Ah,
So I imagine it should be avoided for dry creeks as well. Do you know an alternative weed prevention for a dry creek? Thank you so much in advance.
yeah. For a dry creek, if you have a dry creek, and if you were to plant it with rain garden type, do the study for rain garden plants for your region. And a lot of times just an online search might yield that. And then if you were to plant it with native plants, then they would take over and perhaps outcompete any weed, unwelcome plants. But you're pretty much no, I don't have a good solution other than keeping up on the weeding. Weed string trimming it perhaps might be the fastest way to deal with those. Or even no, you wouldn't want to do flame in California. That's not a solution right now. But yeah, I don't have a good solution for that. But that's not to say there isn't one that exists. Yeah.
Cool. Well, thank you. I don't think there were any more questions, unless anyone has anything else. Yeah. But no, yeah, with that, thank you so much, Sarah. That was like a really great presentation.
Oh, I'm so glad, and thank you all for having me. And I just, like I say, that the Orange County chapter of CNPS really is, like it really truly has been part of our life for like my life for like 35 years or so. So, sort of, what do you call it, tangentially. So my hat's off to all that you do. Seriously, keep it up. It's amazing and wonderful. So
Thank
yeah.
you. Cool.
All
Well,
right.
thank you so much, everyone, for attending. We'll hopefully see you at the next one in October, in person. So, yeah, have
Yeah.
a great day, everyone.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye bye.